a minute too late.
No, it's 1:30.
You want to get in here? You can come in here. You want to come in here? What are your seats, Sandra? Cindy, hi.
You're beautiful.
Lee and David. I didn't look for them. What?
Is his walker gonna be in your way at all?
I'm not gonna dance. Plenty of room.
For the senior prom, we'll have to make sure the ash is all right, right? Hi, Rebecca.
Hello, hello. There's David.
Yeah, there's David. Hi, David. Come on in. Have a seat.
They mentioned it coming down for this. You can't blame them to come over. They only on the weekend.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Okay. Okay, hi everybody. We're going to go ahead and start the program. I'm sure a few people will come trickling in, but this is going to be quite a treat. So how this came about, I'm going to tell you, is Vivian showed me an article that was written about her son Alan. And so I looked at this article, I read this article, and then we kind of talked and decided, well, let's call Alan and see whether or not he would like to come here and do a program. So I called Alan, and then we talked and talked, what do you want to talk about, yada yada. And it was his incredibly wonderful idea to involve his mother. So today we are going to introduce to you Alan Ronkin, Vivian Ronkin, and the program is entitled Past, Present, and Future. So let's welcome them all.
Okay, so I'm on. I'm really happy to see everybody here on a Friday afternoon. We usually have the Rabbi Schmooze group, but this will be a bit, I think, a little bit more interesting. A few weeks ago, my son, Alan, who lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, said that he would be coming here for Mother's Day. Well, that did my heart good.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got together with Mara for this day. Okay, a few weeks ago, Alan, who serves as the Washington, D.C. office of the American Jewish Committee, he was featured on the cover of the Jewish Week, the local Jewish community paper in Washington, D.C. The article covered aspects of part of his job. Well, I'm just gonna flip over a little bit more. And so We talked about him coming, his 30 years of service, and here he is. So my question to Alan is, I'd like to beginning with the question to him. What prompted the Jewish Week to write your story? Who are you, and what brought you to this career path?
Okay, this is really a bit surreal, being interviewed by my mother. I'm sure my mother to ask me, who am I? This is a very existential question. I'm not sure how to answer it. First of all, Myra, thank you. And thank you to everybody here at Heritage Point for hosting me today. I hope this will be a thought-provoking conversation, leave some time for some question and answer. I think the Jewish Week wanted to talk to me because they were looking for folks in the DC community who had a long shelf life. I've been the director of the DC office since 2013 and have worked in the Jewish community, God knows, it's going on 40 years now, which is really quite scary. And I apologize, my phone rings a lot, and if it keeps ringing, which it's ringing now, I will just take a look at it, but I'm not going to answer it. I'm just going to look at it. So they wanted to talk to someone who could give them a basic understanding of what's going on, and from my perspective, and really get to know a little bit about what was driving me to be in this career for so long. And it's funny, the way that the question was framed, what brought me to my career path? And I think a couple of different things. I mean, I was blessed and privileged to be brought up in a Jewish home where we took being Jewish seriously. And it was part and parcel of our daily lives. I was, we went to Jewish school and we were active in our synagogue. I'm sure if any of you know my mom, you know that it's extraordinarily important to us as a family. And I got involved, I would say, pretty early on in my college career in the Soviet Jewry movement. In the early 80s, that, as you all remember, was extremely important. And frankly, I actually really do think it was the last time that the organized Jewish community was able really to rally itself together in a unified fashion for a particular cause. I don't think since that time we have been able to, at least in a unified way, execute. Maybe until recently, maybe until the advocacy on behalf of the hostages, which we can talk about a little bit later. And so I got involved in the Soviet Jewry movement, and in my junior year of college, I elected not to spend the summer in Bridgeport. Actually, that's not true. I used to spend the summer in Bridgeport, where I grew up at home, and Hillel, the organization Hillel, which does campus work on campuses around the country. It's the largest student-facing Jewish organization in the world. Had a New York office, and what they did was they did a program where they brought together Jewish students from across different campuses to do internships in Jewish organizations across the New York area. And I actually, in 1988, did my first internship in the field at the American Jewish Committee in its New York offices up on 3rd Avenue. And I was very cute, I think. I had my little briefcase, and I would take the commuter train every day from Connecticut and march up 3rd Avenue from Grand Central Station with 10,000 of my, closest friends. And I felt, I was a big professional at that, it was very cute back in the day. But, from there, I had the opportunity, I was raised in the Orthodox community, but in that internship, I had the opportunity to meet Jews from other denominations, from other backgrounds, from other experiences, who also took Jewish life seriously. And that was, I think, a real turning point, because I came to the realization that in fact I could do for my community, for my people, and had something to contribute because of my background and because of what I had been, studying and all of that, that would be somewhat unique. And so from there, I did another internship the following semester and finished college and went off to graduate school in Los Angeles to get a master's in Jewish nonprofit management as well as public administration from USC, and have been in the field literally ever since. So that's the 50,000-foot view of the origin story.
My next question is, you see that there's a change in people. And one of your questions is, how do you get people that you fundamentally disagree with to agree on a subject?
So, one of the things that I do, and I've done throughout my career, I've been sort of in the front-facing space. There are people who come and they're fundraisers. They talk, to donors. They talk to Jewish people, or they talk to other people within the system. My job has always been in community relations. I've always been an outside guy. If I'm in my office too much, I'm not doing my job right. My job is to be out in the field, meeting in various settings with whether it would be interfaith people or elected officials or diplomats or whomever I'm working with at any given moment. And I think there are two things about advocacy. There are two things that are important to keep in mind. Number one, relationships really, I think, are the key to bringing people around. No one likes to be lectured. No one likes to be harangued. I'm sure you all remember, was it Norman Vincent Peale? I'm trying to remember How to Make Friends and Influence People. I had a colleague once, someone who I really value, and she said to me, the worst thing that you can do is make the other person wrong. Okay? Now that's not always easy, because often you disagree with them and you think they are wrong. But if you leave them, you lead with, you're wrong and I'm right, and I'm going to tell you why, and then you're going to agree with me, you're going to have a very short-lived career in the advocacy space. You may be a great trial lawyer. I work with a lot of trial lawyers, a lot of litigators, guys who have made their career in very, well-to-do lawyers in Washington, the big white shoe law firms, as they call them. I'll never forget this. One of my past presidents, who I adore, was the head of litigation, actually founded the litigation practice at one of Washington's largest and most prominent law firms. You won't know the name of the law firm because it's that kind of firm, but if you're in Washington, you know this firm. Anyway, so he and I worked very well together, but his view, and I can't get him off of this because, he is who he is, he really thinks if he just sits you down and tells you all the facts, you're going to agree with him. And he may be right sometimes and he may be wrong sometimes, but that's okay when you're trying to convince a jury and a judge. But the defendant in the lawsuit is not going to agree with you, and that's who I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with the person who I have to continue to live with. So rule number one, meet them where they are. Okay, it's one of the first things I learned in grad school, the first rule of social work, even though I'm not a social worker, is to meet the client where they are. If you don't understand the person that you're sitting with in the room, and this should be, it's obvious to most people, but you don't think about it sometimes in the setting where you feel so pressured and you feel so like you really have to make your point, and you really have to get this legislator to do X or this person to do Y. If you don't listen to them, if you don't connect with them, then you will not be successful, because you will be just someone yakking at them and another person who, is haranguing them. The other thing you have to do is be patient. People didn't form their opinions or their views overnight. And they're not going to be persuaded or changed overnight. It's about showing up, it's about being in relationship, and it's about understanding that, and this is something I think we are really struggling with today, if you stay in the place of transactionality when it comes to relationships, when it's all about quid pro quo, if it's all about what I can do for you and you can do for me, that relationship is great until such time as somebody else can do something more important for them. And then you are disposable, because they don't need you anymore. Relationships, while they have a degree of transactionality, must be based on mutual trust, connection, time, experiences. I went to a dinner a week and a half ago. Fascinating. I hadn't been to one of these in a long time. It was the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington had their gala. And this is the kind of event that normally on a Thursday night, and it's been a long week, it's like, do I really need to show up and eat this fakakta piece of fish? And, but I went because I thought it was really worthwhile, and I was right. It was a really, really good event. Many of the people that I saw, I hadn't seen, for quite some time. And the executive director of the IFC, who was a friend, decided that she would sit me with all of the Muslim leaders in the community, who I know, but truthfully, it's been hard over the last couple of plus years, as we can all imagine, to have a deeper, more open connection with Muslim community leadership. It's just been a rough time. It's been a rough time on both sides. But I think she made a real smart move, and I was really glad that that the human investment of time and resources that we've put into cultivating relationships across different communities, whether it was with the Muslim community, I saw the Cardinal there, I had an opportunity to chat with him, there were a few others, that in fact people still do want to have the conversation because they have a sense of trust, they have a sense that I'm not just some talking head, haranguing them about a position, but a human being, and they've met my spouse, and it's someone that you have a relationship with. It's much harder to walk away from someone when they are an actual three-dimensional human being, as opposed to just a name on a screen. So meet them where they are, get to know them, be patient, stick with it, and I think you can move people.
Okay, we have another question. What does rising anti-Semitism tell us about American society today?
A lot. Look, anti-Semitism, and which I spend a lot of my time thinking about, writing about, dealing with, is not new. I don't have to explain that to this audience. Anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred. And it's funny, in 2021, there was a survey done by a very prominent think tank. It's an organization that does a lot of anti-hate work. And they did a survey of over, I think it was like over 700 or 800 hate groups that they identified in the United States. And some, were anti-immigrant, some were anti-women, some were anti-black or whatever. But what did all of them have in common? Absolutely all of them had anti-Semitism built into their philosophy. All of them. It's as if anti-Semitism is like the gateway hatred. But what does it tell us about America today? In an age of rising polarization, in an age of, where the beer you drink is a political statement, that the Jews, if you will, continue to stick out from the left and from the right as targets of hate. Deborah Lipstadt, who was a professor at Emory and recently served until not too long ago as the special envoy, the ambassador of the United States to combat anti-Semitism. Deborah talks about a horseshoe, and there's a space at the bottom of this horseshoe, where both the left and the right meet. And that space is the anti-Semitism space, which to me, I think it says a lot of things, but about America today is our willingness to embrace conspiracies. Okay? Anti-Semitism at its core is a conspiracy myth, or a conspiracy theory. We don't like the word conspiracy theory because theory is like a real thing, but a conspiracy myth, right? That Jews are somehow responsible for, fill in the blank. And it's always the worst possible thing that a society doesn't like, all right? So when in communist societies, we were the capitalists, right? In capitalist societies, we were the communists, okay? We were the ones who rejected Jesus, okay, in Christian societies. We were always countercultural, we were always other. When everybody was a pagan, we were monotheists. You name it, we were the other. But believing those conspiracy theories opens the door. Anti-Semitism as a conspiracy theory opens the door to weaken American democracy, right? Why? And it's not just me saying this. Eric Ward, who's a pretty famous person in the political science space, I forget his exact title. Eric always talks about anti-Semitism undermining the assumptions that you have to have a working democracy. Because if you believe the Jews control the media, you're not going to believe what you read. If you believe that we control the banks, right? Well, what's your faith in the finance system? All of the stuff, the economy, all of those things. When anti-Semitism seeps into a society, it's very bad. It's very bad. You're going to see this in Britain. You've seen this in other places. It gnaws away at the very foundations of the democracy, and that is scary. They call anti-Semitism sometimes the canary in the coal mine. I don't like that analogy because I don't like what happens to the canary. I'm not willing to be the canary in that coal mine. But it does wear away at people's faith in the pillars of our democratic system. And it is for that reason alone, it would be enough, for administrations, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter who they are, have understood over the years that dealing with anti-Semitism as a whole of society, that every element of society has a responsibility to be part of pushing back. It's not because people love Jews, it's because they want to be able to live in a country where people can believe in who they're voting for, the fact that their vote matters. All of this stuff gets undermined when anti-Semitism, sort of seeps in and undermines that fabric.
Okay, we have a next question about the Israel. You right here, we are seeking support for Israel, plummeted on all sides of the political spectrum. How do you approach building support for Israel, and where do you see it going for the future?
It's a really interesting question. how much time you got? it's, it's not simple. Where to even begin on this? I think we're at a really important turning point. Inevitably in every talk, I think over my last 38 plus year career, whenever I talk about Israel publicly, inevitably the first question is as follows. There's generally an elderly gentleman sitting in the back row, like way back, and he will get up, quite indignant. I'm serious, this happens every single time. And he quite indignantly says, why doesn't Israel have better PR? Why don't they tell their story better, right? And every head in the room nods. Oh, yeah, they're not telling their story right. If people only understood. Well, I was at a lecture not too long ago, and Tal Becker, I don't know if you all know who Tal is. He's a vice president of the Hartman Institute. Tal spent decades as in the legal sector in Israel. He did a lot of back channel negotiations. Tal's a brilliant guy. If you have a chance to hear him, you should. Brilliant. He said, Israel tells its story extremely well because the audience that it is trying to tell its story to is not us, is not Paris, is not Rome. They are trying to tell a particular story to their neighbors. Their neighbors are their audience. So they want their neighbors to think that they are dangerous and they're unpredictable, and if you mess with them, you're gonna get crushed. Because that's the message that Israel needs to send to Iran, or to any of the, the Hezbollah or Hamas, or any of the enemies of Israel. They are much less concerned with appearing to be a nice guy or a rational guy so that Macron can like us at the UN. That's not Israel's priority. However, and a big however, we in the West, we American Jews who live in a multicultural democracy, Jews all over the world, Europe, etc., are dealing with a vision of Israel that has been mainstreamed, that actually aligns with the message that Israel is sending to its neighbors, which is that Israel is powerful, Israel is dangerous, Israel's gonna really hit you hard, and not gonna really take, not gonna hold back. And going back to what we said about anti-Semitism before, right? Israel has become, in many ways, the, quote, Jew among the nations. And its crime is being powerful. Because in a perverse sort of sense, we elevate now the weak as the noble, right? People who have strength, countries that are strong in sort of the conventional understanding, the small L liberal understanding, we're supposed to be with the underdog, right? That's always been the case. We should always, side with the underdog, and Israel, in that worldview, not the underdog. So where's this going? I don't know. I wish I did. But I can tell what my gut tells me. We've just been through a horrible couple of years, okay? It is going to get better. It is going to regress to the mean, if you will. It's not going to stay this bad because I think, first of all, for most people, the absence of pictures from Gaza, the absence of Israel in the news all the time. I was actually expecting, around the current Iran, war situation, that it would get much worse. But the way that it's been managed in terms of the media has managed it. I mean, people, they're not thinking about it. They're just not thinking about it. Unless you're really in the activist community, they've moved on to other things like $7 a gallon for gas, but somehow Jews are not getting blamed right this minute for that. It could backfire, it could come back, let's be realistic about it. But right now, I think it's not as bad as I expected it to be. Look, I think one of the things we also have to understand is that I do a lot of workshops on understanding and fighting anti-Semitism, primarily with non-Jewish audiences. I've talked to people all over the spectrum, from media to law enforcement to you name it, we've talked to them. And again, getting back to that image of the man in the back of the room, inevitably, before we changed the nature of the presentation so that we anticipated the question, first question that will come up is, someone told me that I'm an anti-Semite if I criticize Israel. Why is that? And I think we have to be honest with ourselves. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize the government of Israel. Now, do you know who actually says that? It's not my idea. The most commonly used definition of anti-Semitism in the world, the one that all the people on the left hate, is something called the IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. It was developed many years ago. Actually, AJC had a big role in its development, and it's in use in so many institutions I could just sit here and list them. But anyway, the IRA definition says, black on white letters, criticism of Israel that can be leveled at any other country is not anti-Semitic. So, you know, if you don't like what Israel did during the war, you can criticize it just like you would criticize any other army. If you go to the point and say, Israel doesn't have a right to exist, okay, that crosses the line over into anti-Semitism. But to criticize a military operation or how an Israeli government, you know, does what it does, that's not anti-Semitism. In fact, I always ask the same question. I said, what do you call somebody who's critical of the Israeli government? What do you call him? You call him an Israeli, right? Because at any given moment, half the country probably doesn't like some aspect of what its government does. That doesn't make them anti-Semites. Just like if you don't like President X or President Y, it doesn't make you anti-American. So we have to really be careful when we consider something, when we think about something as anti-Semitic. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of anti-Semitism out there. And there's a lot of things to be mad about in terms of how people think and feel and act about Jews. I was on a webinar this morning before I came over here. My colleagues at the ADL did, you know, their annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. And what was interesting about the audit this year is that the numbers are way down, which is great. There are far fewer incidents this year than there were the year before. We're still way higher than we were in 2022. So 2023 and 2024 were sort of, I don't say they were anomalies, but they were obviously in the moment. But, you know, 2025 is different. It's still much, much higher than it should be. But we just have to be really, really careful to know what we are up against and not to muddle up you know, our approach to anti-Semitism, because if we are clear and we're careful and we're thoughtful, we're going to do a lot better in really, you know, getting to the root of the problem. Very few people that I've met, very few, would like to be considered anti-Semites. Very few.
They want to be considered.
They don't want to be considered anti-Semites. Most people don't get up in the morning thinking that I really hate the Jews. They really don't. I mean, and they used to. I mean, you know, decades ago that was not an uncommon thing. But today, you know, it's not. it's not something people aspire to. A lot of them just don't know. They don't know. And I'll tell you a story. How many of you are familiar with the phrase, to Jew someone down? All right, everybody knows the phrase, to Jew someone down. Whenever I give this talk, I tell the same thing. Everybody over 50 knows the term to Jew someone down. Interestingly enough, under 50, most people have never heard that term. Which, think about that. That was a very common term. In fact, and when I point out to people that that is an anti-Semitic trope, it's an anti-Semitic slur, inevitably someone will say to me, "Oh, my grandmother said that all the time." To which I think to myself, "Oh, yeah, that's the problem." But it reminds me, when I worked in Boston some years ago, one of the things I was responsible for was the community Holocaust commemoration. And it was a lot of work, and those of you who visited Boston might know the Holocaust Memorial in Boston is right downtown, next to City Hall, in front of Faneuil Hall, on the Freedom Trail. So it's a place where a lot of tourists go. It's a beautiful memorial, it's very artistic, it's lovely, and we would do gatherings there. And of course this was 15, 20 years ago, and there were a lot more Holocaust survivors who were still alive at that point, and they would come and they would speak, and it would be quite moving. It was really wonderful. And we had protesters who would come. Pro-Palestinian protesters would come to protest Yom HaShoah. They would protest Holocaust, remembrance, which to me was disgusting. I mean, protest Israel Day, fine, I get it. I really do. But to yell at elderly Holocaust survivors, what's wrong with you people? And I would get really annoyed, very annoyed. And it would cost us a lot of money, and it would cost the city a lot of money, because to do the security, even then, and what security costs now, don't even get me started. But the city of Boston did a great job. They would put all their folks out, the sharpshooters, people you didn't see, and it was horrible. You didn't need it, you didn't want it, but there it was. So I was standing with my friend, Lieutenant Sullivan, who was a good 1.5 feet taller than me, big Boston Irish cop, it's a classic right out of the movies. And I got really annoyed one year, and I turned to him and I said, "Lieutenant, wouldn't it be great if we could just get the paddy wagon and round up all these guys and get rid of them all the protesters?" And he put his very giant hand on my shoulder. He's a big guy. And I'm not a small Jew, but this was a big guy. And he said, "Alan, you should know that phrase, the paddy wagon, is offensive to Irish people." And I turned about 5 colors of white, because I had no idea that in fact the phrase paddy wagon came about because in the 1920s or 10s or whatever it was, they used to have the drunk wagon, and they would load up all the the stereotypical Irish drunks, and they would call it the paddy wagon, and it's horrible. It's like saying you don't gyp someone like a gypsy. But I didn't know. I've never used that phrase in that way again. I tell it as a story. But most people who came back from the car dealership and said to their spouse, "Honey, I really Jewed the salesman down," they're not anti-Semites, but they just didn't know. And there's a lot of people who just don't understand what is and what isn't anti-Semitic. I don't know, those of you who remember, last year, around this time, on May 21st, there was a shooting out in front of the Capitol Jewish Museum. 2 young people were killed. They were employees of the Israeli embassy. That was my event. I happened not to be there that night at a show board meeting. My staff was there. It was a very awful experience on a variety of levels. And we work really closely with the FBI. We're lucky, we're in Washington, we have the Washington field office. It's not like, the podunk office of the FBI, it's some of their really top people. And when the FBI sent agents to interview people at the scene, and ironically, the Capitol Jewish Museum is actually kitty corner from the FBI field office. So they literally could see out their back window, and on the security cameras that the FBI has on their building, they actually caught the footage of the shooter. That's how close the FBI building was. So when they sent their people over to the museum to interview witnesses, all the people that were sort of sheltered there, and they were there until 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, collecting witness statements. It was a big deal. The agents that they sent over really had no idea what they were looking at in terms of a Jewish museum or whatever. These were not, they're folks within law enforcement who know about communities, and there are folks like these folks. They were the counterterrorism unit, it was the criminal investigations unit. These are really, really smart, good, educated law enforcement, but they just didn't know anything about Jews. So when I went to meet with the ADIC, the Assistant Deputy Special Agent in charge of the museum, of the field office after the thing happened, I was trying to get more information. I was trying to understand what actually happened, because there was a lot of stories that were going on. Oh, he did this and that, and then the whole thing is horrible enough without the hyperbole and without all the conspiracy theories that came out. And I said to him, I want to thank you for sending your folks and for all the work you're doing. You guys are really doing an amazing job. And I want to tell you what happened when your agents met the folks over at the museum. And I explained to him that they just didn't seem to have a basic working knowledge of why a Jewish organization, has an event with young diplomats, and they just didn't get it. And so what I asked him was if we could, because I do a briefing for them every year on the state of anti-Semitism. I'm going to do it in a couple of weeks. But I said, we need to do something different this year. We're going to do, if you will allow us, we're going to do Jewish Community 101. What does it mean to live as a Jewish person in this community, in this country, so that if, God forbid, something happens in a synagogue and your agent walks into that synagogue, they're going to know what the Ark is, or what a mezuzah is if they see it, or why on Saturday in certain neighborhoods do people all walk to the synagogue, right? Or, why this, why that. So we did 90 minutes on Jewish Community 101. And then we talked about the anti-Semitism, which is fine, because data they get, they know how to count incidents just as well as we do. They understand the numbers, but they don't understand the community. And the reason this very, very long story is, again, folks just don't know us. We think, because we grow up around Jewish communities, that people know us. You work next door, you work in the next office from someone for 30 years, and you make an assumption that they know you in a way that you think they do, but they don't. How much do you know about your Hindu coworker? You might know the name of their spouse, you might know their kids, your picture, whatever, but you don't know their belief system, you don't know their, how they live on a daily basis necessarily. And these folks, they just didn't know Jews. And it's our job, my job, they pay me to do this, is to help folks really understand the community so that that ignorance level, that gap gets reduced and that door gets opened. Anyway, that was a very long answer to a very short question, but do you want to do one more question? I think we should also take some Q&A. What else you got? Yeah.
Well, there's one last question.
And then we'll do Q&A.
If the Jewish community gets it right over the next decade, what would look different?
Okay. This is a personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of my
Well,
group.
maybe you better use this microphone.
Can you not hear me? Better? Okay. this is a personal opinion, I'm not speaking on behalf of AJC, although I don't think anybody would disagree with me. If the Jewish community gets it right over the next decade, I think we're going to have to address several things. Institutionally, we are overbuilt, okay? I had expected during COVID that there would be mergers, there would be some consolidation of the organizational structures, okay? You know, starting in the 80s, we went through this period that every rich person decided they were going to make their own organization. You know, there are currently 160 organizations that were founded in the last 2 years to fight anti-Semitism. It's insane, okay? It's insane. It's overbuilt. We cannot sustain it, and the money can be better spent if we can figure out a way to rationalize our communal structure. I'm not suggesting there should be one Jewish organization. There's always somebody in an audience that says, why can't we just have one Jewish organization? They'll do everything. It doesn't work that way. You know, it's like, why should we have Coke and Pepsi? Well, some people like Coke and some people like Pepsi, and that's okay. But what we have now is far too large. Second, I think we have to reckon with the demographic shift that we're going to have. It's going to look different. Jewish families are going to look different. We need to be investing in people having more authentic, integrated Jewish experiences, by which I mean, you know, in my view, one of the most important institutions in Jewish life that we ever built was overnight camp. Okay? Any of you have kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, whatnot. In my experience, the ones who went to overnight camp, whether it was Camp Ramah or whatever, they have those friends from Camp Ramah forever. You can be 60 years ago, I was at Camp Ramah. I remember the kid I was in the bunk with. It's crazy. I never did camp, by the way. It just wasn't what I did. And I'm shocked that these people continue to have their friends. And their Jewish lives are stronger. Why? Because they had an immersive experience, okay, where Judaism was normal, where being Jewish was normal. It wasn't other. Even Jewish day school, as wonderful as it is, and I'm a 25-year graduate of Jewish day school, we always knew that we were different. Okay, I got off that school bus, and everybody else on my block did not go to my school. Okay, I was always other. We all knew this. But when you go to camp, our holidays are the holidays. Our rhythm is the rhythm. And it changes something for Jewish kids. And it's really important. If we get it right, we will find a way in our, historically, we adapt very, very well. We're going to be around. I'm not worried about the obliteration of the Jewish people. That I've heard that song before. I have faith. Where are the Hittites? Where are the Romans? Where are the Nazis? They're all in the garbage, and we're still here. And yes, we're small, and yes, we're resilient, and I'm not worried about the Jews disappearing. I am worried about the quality of their Jewish experience, and I'm not suggesting that everybody has to go to shul every day, and I'm not suggesting anything in terms of how anybody practices. When I speak to non-Jewish audiences and I tell people that there are atheists who are Jews, their heads explode because they don't get it. There are many ways to be Jewish, but we got to make sure that people are actually engaging seriously with their Jewish life, whether it's through Judaism and study and all of that, or whether it is through their cultural Jewish practices, or however they continue to connect. That's the thing that worries me most. It's and let's be honest. There's a fancy word, a 50-cent word called antipodal tendencies. I learned this in graduate school. It's the only word I remember. Antipodal tendencies, I put the mic down, look like this. Okay? So what's happening is you've got a lot of people who are sort of disappearing on both sides, but the people who are sticking around in the center are stronger. They're more enriched. We're going to be smaller, I think, in this country. I really do. You know, it's interesting. We were 6 million Jews, like in the 50s, and we're still around 6 million Jews, which has everything to do with our birth rate, everything to do with assimilation. I think we're going to be smaller, but I think we're going to be more able to deal with things because we're going to be in much more enriched and much more connected Jewish life. As you can tell, I tend to babble, so I'm going to stop talking. But there's a lot more to say on that topic, and I'll just open it up to your questions.
Do you want me to pass the mic around?
Yeah, Myra, if you want to be Phil Donahue, go for it. You know, there's a reference. I can only make that reference to Phil Donahue
Yes.
here. Come on, somebody's got to have a question.
I was just gonna say the same thing. Somebody's
Gentleman in
got
the
to have
back.
more than one question.
And I promise I'll go fast, so if people have more questions, I'll go fast, lightning round.
I'm going to try and avoid asking you the question from the guy in the back that you referred to earlier, because you already
Asked and answered, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So our younger generation of kids are in the U.S. are being radicalized in a lot of different ways. And some of those ways are driven by the right in Israel and how they're behaving. So I'm wondering, how do you get to people, young people, who are experiencing both that and the, as is my daughter, who is liberal, progressive, the negative pushback from some of her colleagues about being a Jew and what Israel is doing to its neighbors. How do Jewish young people survive that and remain Jewish?
It's a great question. I'm going to turn it around on you. Do you remember that musical? I always forget which one it is. There's a great song from a musical, you know, What's the Matter with Kids Today? Why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? Do you guys remember? Is it Bye Bye Birdie? Yeah, I never remember which one. I think we come to that conversation about young Jews thinking that we always have it right. I think the first thing we have to do is have the humility to take a half a step back and say, hey, wait a minute, something's going on over there. Maybe there's something we can learn from their experience. Now, I said that in Baltimore a few weeks ago, and I got people were appalled. So let me finish the answer to the question. It's not easy, okay? I have a son who's 32, who lives in San Francisco, okay? I think he's the only Zionist under 50 left in San Francisco. Credit to his mother and her father, and raised him right. All of his friends are DSA, okay? DSA is Democratic Socialists of America, the Mamdani people, we can go on about that forever. And he had a lot of conversations with him over Passover. He came for the week. Thank God, it was great. And we talked a lot about how he goes to Hanukkah parties and Shabbat dinners with these people, with these young Jews who put themselves in the camp of non-Zionist and anti-Zionist. And all, it gets, whatever hair I've got left, gets up on my neck, and oh my God, and it's, So, what I said in Baltimore, and I'll say it here, is hug those kids and keep them close. Back to what I said at the beginning, okay? Making them wrong and throwing them out, you're going to get the result that you're looking for. They're not going to come back, okay? Which doesn't mean you have to agree with them about everything. In fact, you should not agree with them about everything. But if you don't sit with them and don't hug them and be their grandparent or be their aunt or their uncle or whomever, we will lose them. And we don't have that many Jews that we can afford to lose. Yes, it's hard right now, but even those people, and I met a lot of them, who are really mad at Israel. They're really mad. And I mean, remember, for a lot of these folks, the only prime minister of Israel they've ever known is Bibi Netanyahu, okay? And not the Bibi Netanyahu that we remember from 1990, when he was, you know, a commentator on CNN in the first Gulf War with Saddam Hussein. But the Bibi Netanyahu, whose coalition, you know, today does a lot of things that organizations, including my own, are very unhappy about. That's the Israel that they see. That's not going to last forever, number one. And I think we will find that yes, there will be a certain core of those young people who are never going to, let me say it differently. No generation is going to relate to themselves or their Jewish life in the way that their parents or grandparents' generation did. It's just not the way the world works. A lot of the folks who are really, really mad, you know, I think we can be creative and find ways to help them come back without giving away the core commitment to a thriving, democratic state of Israel. I don't think those things are in conflict for the vast majority of those folks. But I urge everybody that I talk to not to, number one, not to despair, because despair is a sin, by the way, according to the Hasidic masters. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav once said that it is absolutely forbidden from the Torah to despair. Asur lehi ya'ish. You're not allowed to despair, so that's off the table. And at the same time, we gotta do the work. So we need to be eyes open, but you know, there's a reason we have one mouth and two ears, right? We listen double than we speak. And when we listen, and when people feel listened to, when they feel in relationship, it's very hard to walk away. And I think that's what these young people who are having these Shabbat dinners, you know, and trying to figure out how to excise, you know, Israel from their Jewish life, and it's very complicated. It's a much longer answer, but I think it is imperative for us to hug those kids and to do a lot of listening and to stay true to the values that we bring to the table, because then people will respect us, and have those conversations, as hard and as difficult as they are. It's not a whole answer, but it's as good as I can do it, you know, 2 minutes left. Anybody else? The gentleman in the back. Yes.
I'm the guy in the back of the room you were talking to. I have to commend you on one of the most important learning experiences I've had in a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was from my mom, by the way. Thank my mom, really. Nothing happens, you know, without her. Anybody else? Larry, yes. She'll bring the mic. Hang on.
This is a combination, question and statement. I used to look at Israel as a country that was the most benevolent in the whole world. When there was a disaster in any country, they would send a whole flotilla of dogs and people to help.
They still do.
They still do.
Mm-hmm.
The